Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody participating today. Hope everybody is ready for the holidays and is looking forward to a nice 3-day weekend. Today's topic is we're going to talk a little bit more about poor performance. We've kind of touched on this previously. We want to try to expand on this a little bit. If you could hold your questions until the end, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. And if you have a more specific question that needs to be answered with a little bit more privacy, you by all means can email or call me and we can talk through that particular problem for you. So when dealing with poor performance issues, these are by far the most difficult type of unemployment claim to win because you're dealing with a lot of intangibles and a lot of gray area when you're dealing with what is poor performance and what is inability. And the focus that the unemployment statute and the unemployment office places on these types of claims is whether or not the claimant had the ability to perform the work. Okay, so it's all about whether or not they had the skills necessary to perform the work to your satisfaction. So the first question they ask is, did the claimant have the skills? We've all had individuals where we've hired who've overemphasized or overstated their ability or their experience. They get in there and the job is too much for them. So do they have the skills necessary to actually perform the work and perform it in a manner that is satisfactory to the employer? The other one was the claimant making a good faith effort to do the work? Okay, this is the second criteria. Were they doing everything under their power to actually perform the work, making a good faith effort in order to complete and do the assignment to the level of satisfaction that the employer expects of them? And we're going to be talking a lot more here about that in the next couple of slides. And then, have they performed the duties adequately in the past? Did they meet the expectations? Did they show and exhibit that they did have the skills necessary to perform the job satisfactorily? And were they making a good faith effort? And have they shown that they've had the ability to perform the duties satisfactorily in the past? Oftentimes what you see when you reprimand an employee is that you see a reprimand and the employee's performance spikes, okay? And they meet the expectations, they meet the performance goals, and then after that first initial warning, you see a degradation of their performance again. Then you may give them another written warning, and they spike again and meet all expectations or come close to meeting expectations. That's a key element in this type of unemployment claim, is showing that they had the ability to perform the duties in the past, and they did it satisfactorily when they wanted to. And then finally, did they have knowledge of the expectations? Okay, were they given a job description? Were they given proper training? Did they have to have special certification, special licensing, or something to that degree that is required of the job? What were the job instructions like? Were they verbal? Were they written? Is it a standard operating procedure? Is it something that occurs no matter, you do it the same way no matter what, every time, every single time? So those are all other things that the unemployment office is going to ask when they're adjudicating the unemployment claim. So these are the areas that you're going to be really focusing on in your documentation. Now, the difference between misconduct and inability is it's a very thin line, okay? And it really is going to be viewed by whoever is viewing the documentation and the information. And what is the difference? Misconduct is a willful and deliberate act on the part of the employee. They had total control of their circumstances. Okay, so like I was giving the example earlier about a standing operating procedure. Do they have a set way, a set of work instructions, a set manner in which they were to perform the work, and are they deviating from that particular standard operating procedure? Because there is going to be where you prove the willfulness in their misconduct and their poor performance is not necessarily the end result, but what got them to the end result. And an example of that would be is they're choosing to skip steps in the process. They're not following the process, whatever it might be. Okay? Inability, conversely, is defined as a claimant made a good faith effort to perform the work, but lacked the skills necessary to meet the employer's standards. So, if you have an employee who's a salesperson who is doing everything you ask of them, making the proper phone calls, making the proper follow-up contacts, sending out proper, communications, et cetera, whatever it might be, they just can't sell, then there's going to be a likelihood that that's going to be inability, because they're doing everything they can that you ask of them. They're just not very good at the job. The key here is in your documentation, you have to find and focus on things that they control, that they have their destiny in, okay? If you focus on just the end result, they didn't sell enough cars, they didn't meet your production goals, whatever else it is, and that's the only thing you focus on in your documentation, then you are not going to have a very good chance of winning the unemployment claim, okay? Now, how do we go about this, okay? So obviously we're wanting documentation that is specific and detailed, okay? And as I was mentioning, you want to control this message. You want to assume that you have hired a person who has the ability to do the job and you have trained them to do the job, okay? Trust in your manager's ability to train and give clear work instructions. Work from the assumption that they have the knowledge and the ability to do the job. You always want to avoid sentences or any kind of documentation that imply inability, okay? If you write out in the first sentence of your written warning, especially a final written warning, Joe has consistently been unable to meet our performance standards, okay? They're going to skip every other part of that sentence except for unable. Okay, you've given the claimant a softball right there to hit out of the park, and the unemployment office is going to latch onto that because you in your own documentation are saying, for all intents and purposes, they have the inability to do the job. Okay, what you want to do is you want to say something along the lines of, Joe has failed to meet the standards 5 out of 12 weeks. Okay, Joe has shown the ability to meet these standards now. Okay. So what you're doing is you're setting it up to where Joe, you're removing the inability issue to a large part because you're showing right now, you're controlling the message. Joe has been able to do the job 5 out of 12 weeks. Now, what has happened out of those 7 out of the 12 weeks that he hasn't done the job? And that's when you can start drilling in and start focusing then on things that are within his control. Now, when you talk about focusing on items that the employee controls, the first thing is why? Why is that employee not meeting your standards? Well, the first thing is, are you following your training? Are they doing everything that you've told them to do that is expected of them? Are they following all your standard operating procedures? Are they making sure that they are following the detailed list of things that they're supposed to do in order to create a product or to complete a sale or to follow up with a patient, whatever it might be? If you look hard enough within your job descriptions, whether they're written or unwritten, you have a process in place that they're supposed to follow. Now, what is it that they're doing that they're not following that process? What is their willful actions that are leading them to skip certain parts or not to complete certain parts satisfactorily? One of the things, obviously, is, are they always focusing on their job duties? Okay, what are they doing in that 8 hours or whatever time frame they're at work? What are they doing instead of their work? What is it? That's the things you got to find and you have to focus on, because not meeting sales goals or not meeting productivity goals is not going to be the winner. It is showing that they had the ability to do the job and they were choosing to do something other than their work that was preventing them from meeting the satisfactory performance goals that you had in place for them. So drill down, find the reasons why they're not performing consistently. I guarantee you that if you sit down and look through the processes, you are going to find places, make them even justify it. Go through the process in the early stages with them. Say, this is the things you're supposed to be doing. Why are you not doing them? Are you doing them? And if you aren't doing them, what's preventing you from doing them? Okay? Utilize your whole policy manual too, because likely there is a policy violation that's directly related to the poor performance, more specifically, their conduct that's leading to the poor performance. It could be a social media policy. They're on their phone, on Facebook. It could be a cell phone policy. It could be they're disappearing for time. It could be taking long breaks. It could be something as simple as they just love the gab on the line, okay? So whatever that is, you want to find that policy infraction that takes the gray out, okay? The more black and white you can make a policy infraction, the better it is for you, okay? Because if you can eliminate any kind of gray, i.e. inability or good faith effort or anything like that, which is all very interpretive, it's very subjective, and narrow it down to something that is more black and white, then you are going to have a better chance of prevailing, okay? If you have a cell phone policy and you catch them working on the cell phone, playing on their cell phone when they're supposed to be working, you're still going to be addressing the poor performance issue, but you're going to be addressing it in a manner that is truly black and white. They're either choosing to use their cell phone on the work line or they're not, okay? So that's the type of thing you want to try to narrow down and drill down in as best you possibly can. So here's a couple of examples I try to create for diffusing, that whole inability issue, to eliminate that, to eliminate the whole inability thing. Remember, you're kind of working in excuse elimination when you're dealing with this type of stuff. You want to try to let them hang themselves in some way, okay? So, for example, in poor sales, are they following your customer service expectations? Are they going out and greeting customers? Are they being friendly to the customers when they're at the line? Are they following up on other sales expectations? For example, are they making the proper number of phone calls, okay? If they're not, okay, that's a good likelihood that they're not going to meet your sales goals, but why are they not making the proper number of calls? Why are they not making the 25 calls a day or whatever it is that you have? Make them explain that to you, okay? Are they following up? A lot of people who have sales forces, they have expectations that you are to have certain number of contacts and recontacts and stuff like that. Why are they not doing that? Are they supposed to send out thank you cards? Are they supposed to send out whatever type of message, follow-up message that you can think of? Focus on that. Because again, we're not saying that they have their poor sales is as a result of their inability. What we're asking them, are you doing everything under your control, under your power, under our procedures to give you the best chance possible of making a sale, okay? If they are expected to keep a log or something like that and they're not completing the log, reprimand them for that, because again, that's a black and white issue. If you're supposed to be completing a sales log and they're not completing that sales log, you're not reprimanding them because they can't sell. You're reprimanding them now for not following a very specific black and white expectation, okay? So that goes back to what I was saying about using your whole policy handbook, using your descriptions to your best advantage to you, okay? Focus on conduct. Are they professional? Are they misrepresenting facts and figures? Do you have a lot of customer complaints about them, about their conduct? Even though customer complaints can be very subjective at times too, they tend to be a lot more black and white than inability, okay? If they're not acting professionally and you have a pattern of customer complaints or a pattern of observing them acting unprofessional, then that is something that's going to be a lot more impactful than just a generality of poor performance. Are they engaging your customers? Okay, is there something distracting them from engaging customers? Is there something distracting them from making the proper phone calls? Again, oftentimes what we see when we start drilling down in hearing preparation or claim investigation, there's always something. There's some reason why they're not focused on their job, okay? And when we discover that after the fact, and we discover that after the documentation is created, It's much more difficult to reintroduce that in the hearing process, especially, than it is if that is introduced at the time of the warning, okay? So make them explain to you why they're not meeting their goals. Why, and if you observe it, by all means, you need to document that, okay? Also, make sure you point out when they have met the goals in the past, because again, it is not only a useful tool to diffuse the inability issue in the unemployment claim, but it's also a useful tool for you in the way and means of reprimanding the employee, because you're pointing out to them that they've had the ability to do the job and that you know they have to do the job, so you're not going to accept they can't do the job, okay? So you're controlling the process. You're controlling this whole documentation process by eliminating the excuses up front, because you're showing them, we know you can do it when you want to. Now we're going to drill down and find out why you're not doing it. Poor production, okay? Past experience and training, okay? Some states have a burden of what's called assumption, okay? And that means is that not everything has to be drilled into a written warning or a written policy or a written job description. There are certain things that the state is going to assume that they have a responsibility to comply with, that's reasonably owed the employer. For example, if they're a DOT employee, okay, if they have a Department of Transportation certification, there is an expectation that they are going to comply with DOT transportation regulations. There may be an expectation that they follow your safety procedures and policies under OSHA, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to necessarily be written out in a policy. It just really is going to depend upon what the job title is, what the job duties are, and how obvious that expectation is, okay? But more often than not, you're going to follow that up with what is your standard operating procedure, okay? What is that procedure that they're supposed to follow no matter what, okay? This is the steps you're supposed to do. If it's a patient, say you're a patient, you're a medical facility and you're bringing in patients, you have a set procedure in place of what they're supposed to follow in order to properly induct the patient into your medical facility, for example, okay? It could be anything like that, but it's going to depend upon how well you are at communicating that to them at the time of hire and in their training, and then it's going to, is it going to be something that they have knowledge of in some form of written job description, okay? If it's not written, okay, you have to then show in the documentation process that you have reiterated that expectation, okay? You need to be very specific in your written documentation then, if it's a verbal expectation. Not meeting numbers and too slow, okay? This is one of the more common ones, that their productivity is because they're just too slow. Again, this is difficult because you can't just rely on the fact that they're not meeting the productivity numbers. The state will not accept that. They're going to give the claimant the benefit of the doubt, because the claimant is going to go in and immediately say, I was doing everything under my power to do the job. Okay. Now it's up to you and your documentation to have created a narrative that shows that they weren't focused 100% on their job for 8 hours a day, that they had a tendency to get distracted through some other means, through other personal endeavors that are keeping them from doing their job. Now, it goes back to the other thing, okay? Are they conducting themselves professionally? Okay, are they compliant with work instructions when asked by their supervisor? Are they following those work instructions? Insubordination is always a good way to circumvent the inability and the good faith error argument, okay? If you can't nail that, then you need to start working on a pattern, okay? What is it that what is it, the same pattern that over and over and over, okay? One, they both take patients but one is more black and white. And whenever you can focus on personal conduct of any kind, you're going to have a better chance of prevailing. I've already kind of mentioned this before. This really goes to anybody who's regulated by some state or federal agency. If you can weave in your state and federal regulations governing their performance and their behavior, you always have a much better than average chance of prevailing, because that goes to the assumption thing. There's an assumption by the state that if you had to go through a process of certification, licensing, specialized training, whatever it might be, there is an assumption that you knew what was expected of you, because you had to take extra special means to get that job. Okay, you had to achieve some form other than the normal process of just being hired to have that particular specialized duty. Okay, so whenever you can, whether it's in medical, if it's some form of family and aging, the senior citizens, whatever it might be, even some things that are OSHA and DOT regulated, that's an opportunity for you to weave that into your written warnings and make that the focus, not the performance, but that the focus. Because again, it's a black and white thing. They are expected to follow state and federal regulations. And then whenever possible, try to, you want to minimize the he said, she said type of arguments, okay? Are there witness statements? Can you get a witness statement from people who observe their behavior? Is there surveillance video? Even if there's no sound, surveillance video is helpful, because again, if the surveillance video is supposed to show the claimant at their job station for 20 minutes and they're 20 minutes absent, that's key, because that's showing they have made a personal choice to leave their workstation. And now why have they left the workstation? Because it's having a direct impact on their productivity. Recorded conversations. A lot of people who do customer service, who do sales, who do that type of thing, they're on the phone and they're having interaction with with customers and consumers on the telephone. A lot of times you all are recording those conversations. Okay, so use those to your advantage. Go back and review those when you are reprimanding an employee. Find out. Many years ago, we had a client who had the very similar thing, and they had a very set script they were supposed to follow for these telephone interviews. Okay, they were very important telephone interviews for purposes of insurance. We were able to go back and pull the tapes, and in their documentation over time, they wrote this lady up using these recordings and pointing out that she was deviating from the from this script, this very specific script, and it was having an impact, a direct impact on not only her performance, but also on the consumer's ability to get proper underwriting for the insurance that they were applying for. So there's ways to do that. Just use all your tools to your advantage. Okay. Now, wrapping it up, proving misconduct. Okay. Often the misconduct is not the poor performance. It's not the end result. It's what they failed to do to get to the end result. Okay. We all focus on what it was. They were only 75% proficient. We expect them to be 95% proficient. That number is irrelevant, okay, to the unemployment office. All you're telling them is they didn't meet the goal. You got to tell them why they didn't meet the goal. What did they do that what prevented them from making that extra 20% on a regular basis? So you got to emphasize that they had the ability to do the job, and then focus on those things that they controlled. Make sure that you do that, because if you do that, you're going to have a much better written warning, for one, and for two, you're going to have a much better chance of winning the unemployment claim. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. You can type them in on the screen below, or if you want to, you can email me specifically, and we can follow up in a personal email. So go ahead and open it up for any questions.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah,
John
John.
Moore. So what do you think? I mean, it's really not your percentage of wins, but companies in poor performance. Is it 50-50, or what do you think the overall percentage is of winning a case?
I would say that it's less than 50-50. I bet you it's 35-65 in favor of the claimant. And the reason why is, what's that?
I'm not too sure I've won any.
Well, the problem is, and I'm not, speaking to you. I think we have actually won some for you, believe it or not. But
performance?
Well, I think we had a couple of performance issues. But anyway, the focus is always on that end result, okay? And that's where the documentation tends to fall down on, is because they just focus on the fact that they're not meeting the goal, okay? That's not where the proper focus is going to be under the unemployment law, okay? Because as I mentioned, it goes back to the inability issue. And some states are much more militant about it than say like Texas, where you have your primary office. California, for example, if you don't have anything that points to to the control of the claimant in your documentation, you almost have no chance of prevailing in California. So it also depends kind of on the state too.
It's very important, I think, to train our supervisors, because they usually come to you after the fact and there's no documentation, and so it's important to train the first line supervisors.
Absolutely, because they're the ones who are going to observe the performance, and more importantly, okay, they're the ones who understand your standard operating procedures. Okay, I was in human resources. I knew the broad strokes of what all of my employees did and what their job descriptions were supposed to do, but I didn't know the minutia of it. Okay, you've got to rely on them, those frontline managers, to A, be observant, and then B, able to narrate those observations in a cohesive manner, because again, it comes down to firsthand testimony at all times. The more firsthand, testimony and evidence you can provide, regardless of what the labor law arena is, the better chance you're going to have at prevailing.
Right. I'm almost starting to focus more on non-compliance instructions or insubordination than performance.
Well, that goes to exactly what I was. That's a good example of what I was talking about, because for those of you who don't know, John is in a production environment. Okay, so they have a very set structure of how to do certain things in their production environment, right? So it's a little easier for a production environment because there's a set way of doing certain things, whereas in other industries there might be a more intangible set of processes or procedures, what you got to do. But I guarantee you, if you sit down, especially in the initial stages, and if you sit down and you force the employee to explain to you what they're doing on a day-to-day basis or on a process-by-process basis, and force them to explain to you why they're not meeting the goals, first of all, you're going to get a much better training. Because look, we all know that in the initial stages, the purpose of a written warning is to train and to educate. Okay, you purposely are trying to improve that employee. So it's an opportunity for you to retrain that employee. It's an opportunity for you also then to redirect them and get them to prioritize and refocus on the proper things. But whenever you, as John said, whenever you can focus on what they were doing and what they had control of, you're going to have a much better chance of proving misconduct.
Thanks, Jeff.
Any other questions? All right. Well, hey, if you have a question, don't hesitate to email or call me. And I hope that you all have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll talk to you next year in our next webinar. Thanks a lot, and have a great year.